But he made it so easy, man, with the martial arts and all, stuff.
But I'm bandwagon. I like to stay happy. So whoever wins, I'll be happy with. But
there are movies that entertain you, and then there are movies that become part of the culture so quietly and so completely that most people forget they ever had to discover them in the first place. Friday is one of those films. Released in the spring of 1995 on a budget that most directors would laugh at today, this movie did something that Hollywood had never quite managed before. It made an entire generation feel seen without ever trying to be important. No grand speeches. No tragic endings. No moral lessons delivered with a heavy hand. Just two guys on a porch on a Friday afternoon, and somehow that was enough to change everything. But here's the thing about Friday that most people still do not fully understand. The film you watched and the film that was supposed to exist are two very different movies. What ended up on screen was shaped by accidents, pressure, real danger, personal conviction, and one young comedian from Atlanta who walked into an audition completely unprepared and still managed to create one of the most beloved characters in comedy history. Chris Tucker has been slowly peeling back the curtain on what really happened during those 3 weeks of filming, and what he has revealed changes the way you see the entire movie. To understand why Friday mattered, you have to go back to where Hollywood was in the early 1990s. The films being made about black life in urban America were serious, unflinching, and important. Boys and the Hood. Menace to Society. Colors. These were films that demanded your attention and earned it. But they also told only one version of a story. The version where the neighborhood was a place of tragedy, danger, and inevitable loss. Ice Cube, who had lived in South Central Los Angeles, knew that version of the story. But he also knew another version entirely. He knew what it felt like to sit outside on a warm afternoon and laugh with your friends about absolutely nothing. He knew the humor of everyday life in the neighborhood, the jokes between neighbors, the absurd drama of minor situations, and the way people could find lightness even in circumstances that looked difficult from the outside. That version of the story had never made it to a movie screen. When Cube sat down with his writing partner DJ Pooh to develop the script for Friday, the goal was not to make a political statement or correct a cultural imbalance. The goal was simply to capture a Saturday afternoon feeling. A movie you could watch over and over again. Something that felt lived in rather than performed. What they produced in that writing process was a script built almost entirely from real experiences. Real people, real situations, and real conversations pulled from their actual lives. The character of Craig, who gets fired from his job on his day off, was drawn directly from a cousin of Ice Cube's who worked as a delivery driver and experienced that exact humiliation. The character of Smokey, the charming neighborhood dealer with a conscience and a habit he cannot shake, came from DJ Pooh's own past. These were not characters invented at a writing desk. They were portraits. When New Line Cinema agreed to finance the film, they attached one significant condition. DJ Pooh, who had written the role of Smokey with himself in mind, could not play the part. The studio saw a writer and a musician, not a leading man, and they wanted someone with proven performance credentials. It was a blow to Cube and Pooh, but the money was real and the opportunity was real, so they went looking for someone who could carry the role. The names they considered were legitimate. Chris Rock was discussed seriously. Tommy Davidson, who had made his name on In Living Color, was another strong option. Either of those choices would have satisfied the studio and produced a perfectly good film. But Ice Cube had seen someone performing on Def Comedy Jam who operated on a completely different frequency than anyone else in comedy at the time. His name was Chris Tucker, and he was 22 years old. Tucker was not a safe choice. He had almost no film experience and no track record that would reassure a nervous studio executive. But the energy he brought to a stage was unlike anything Cube had witnessed. Tucker moved fast, thought fast, talked fast, and seemed to exist at a slightly higher voltage than the people around him. Cube and Pooh had written Smokey as a specific kind of person, someone whose good nature and terrible judgment existed in perfect balance, and Tucker felt like the human embodiment of that character. The audition did not go well. Tucker admitted later that he showed up without preparing properly. He thought his natural personality would be enough to carry the room. It was not. The people watching were unimpressed, and in almost any other situation, that would have been the end of the conversation. But something about Tucker's presence, even in a subpar audition, convinced the team to give him another chance. What happened next is one of the more unusual stories in Hollywood casting history. Tucker reached out to Angela Means, an actress who had been cast in a small role in the film, because he wanted help connecting with her acting coach. Means had a different idea. She invited him to dinner instead. Over a plate of spaghetti at her kitchen table, she ran him through an informal workshop, not teaching him lines, but pushing him to find the actual character underneath the performance. By the time the meal was finished, she later said, Tucker had stopped playing Smokey and started being him. He went back for his second audition a different person and got the role immediately. The shooting schedule for Friday was 20 days. That is not a compressed timeline for a small independent film. It is a remarkable constraint for any film at all. Most Hollywood productions spend 2 to 3 months in front of cameras. Friday had 3 weeks. Because of the budget limitations, the actors were permitted exactly 2 takes per scene. If the first take failed and the second take failed, the scene stayed as it was. There was no third attempt and no money to accommodate one. For a 22-year-old with minimal film experience, this could have been paralyzing. Instead, Tucker found that the limitation actually freed him. He has spoken about those 20 days with genuine affection, describing the simplicity of the setup, just a camera, him, and Ice Cube on a porch, as something that forced him into the character in a way that more comfortable conditions never would have allowed. There was no time to overthink a scene. The camera rolled and you either had it or you did not. The physical location added another layer of pressure that had nothing to do with performance. Friday was not shot on a soundstage or a studio backlot. It was filmed on a real street in South Central Los Angeles, specifically at the corner of 126th Street and Normandy. Director F. Gary Gray had grown up in that neighborhood, and the houses used for filming belonged to his actual childhood friends. The authenticity of the location was part of what made the film feel so real, but it also created a genuine safety concern. The area was known Crips territory. The Crips had a well-established color identity in blue, and their long-standing rivals, the Bloods, wore red. In South Central during the 1990s, wearing the wrong color in the wrong neighborhood was not a fashion mistake. It was a potential trigger for violence. The production team established a strict rule: no red clothing of any kind, for anyone on set, at any time. Actors, camera operators, sound technicians, everyone who showed up to work on Friday had to check their wardrobe carefully before arriving on location. Showing up in a red shirt, even accidentally, could have endangered the entire cast and crew. The neighborhood's relationship with the production was complicated in other ways too. In one scene involving a low rider, 2 local men were sitting on a wall in the background of the shot. Production staff asked them to move. They refused. Offers of compensation were made. They refused those too. They were sitting on their own property and had no interest in accommodating a film crew. With no legal authority to remove them and no time to find a different angle, the filmmakers made a decision: keep rolling. Those 2 men remain in the final cut of Friday to this day, sitting on that wall, completely unbothered by the Hollywood production surrounding them. Most people who have seen the film dozens of times have never noticed them. But they are there. The script that Ice Cube and DJ Pooh had written was solid. It had shape and purpose and genuinely funny moments. But the film that audiences fell in love with is significantly different from that document. Ice Cube has stated that approximately 35% of the finished movie was improvised, meaning more than a third of what you laugh at was invented on the spot by actors working under a 2-take limit with no safety net. Faison Love, who played Big Worm, the ice cream man with a firearm and a very short temper, has said he essentially ignored the script entirely. He showed up, listened to the other actors, and responded as the character in real time. Every word Big Worm speaks came out of Love's head in the moment, constructed from nothing but the situation and his instincts. The most famous line in the entire movie was not written by anyone. When Debo delivers his brutal hit on Red and Tucker's Smokey witnesses it, the reaction that followed, the faces, the sounds, and the words that came tumbling out, was entirely improvised by Chris Tucker in that single moment. The line that has been quoted millions of times since 1995, the one that became so embedded in popular culture that most people cannot even remember the first time they heard it, did not exist before that take. Tucker created it on the spot, under the pressure of knowing he might not get another chance to do it better. The same is true of Bye Felicia. Angela Means played a neighborhood woman so minor that most audiences do not even register her as a named character. The name itself came from someone the writers knew. But the way Tucker dismissed her, the specific tone, the complete absence of any concern in his voice, the casual finality of it, was entirely his own invention. Decades after that afternoon on a street in South Central, those two words became one of the most widely used dismissal phrases on the internet. Tucker never planned it. He just said it and moved on. When Friday became a genuine cultural phenomenon, Ice Cube moved quickly toward a sequel. Next Friday arrived in 2000, and Friday After Next followed in 2002. Both films were successful. But the character at the heart of the original, the one audiences most wanted to see again, was absent from both of them. 4 years, the assumption was money. Tucker had become a major star by then, and the logic seemed simple enough. He must have priced himself out of the franchise. That assumption was wrong. Ice Cube has confirmed directly, in response to fan questions, that the production team was prepared to pay Tucker between $10 and $12 million to appear in Next Friday. That was not a lowball offer designed to fail. That was serious money, offered seriously, to bring back a character that audiences genuinely missed. Tucker turned it down anyway. 2 years after Friday was released, Tucker had become a born-again Christian. That personal transformation changed how he saw himself and how he saw Smokey. The character's humor was built substantially around foul language and the casual promotion of habits that Tucker no longer wanted to endorse publicly. He did not want young people watching that film and concluding that those behaviors were harmless or funny, and he was no longer willing to perform them regardless of what was being offered. Tucker has said he kept that reasoning private for a long time, allowing the money rumors to fill the silence because he had simply not addressed it directly. When he finally explained himself, the answer was disarmingly honest. He could not be Smokey anymore because Smokey was not who he was. The financial sacrifice was significant. Across the Friday sequels, Tucker potentially walked away from tens of millions of dollars in earnings. But he walked toward something else, Rush Hour with Jackie Chan, which became a global phenomenon of its own, and for the third installment of that franchise alone, Tucker was paid $25 million. The math, in the end, was not catastrophic. 30 years later, Friday endures not because it was technically perfect or culturally groundbreaking in any obvious way. It endures because it was honest. Every imperfection in that film, the car that kept breaking down, the neighbors who refused to move, the lines that were never written down, contributed to something that felt more real than most movies with 10 times its budget. Chris Tucker came into that production as an unknown 22-year-old who had failed his first audition. He left it as one of the most quotable performers of his generation. And he walked away from the franchise that made him famous not because of arrogance or greed, but because he took the character seriously enough to know that he could not play him anymore with integrity. What most people missed in Friday was not a hidden detail in the background of a scene. It was the fragility of the whole thing. How close it all came to not existing at all, how much of it was held together by instinct and improvisation and the sheer creative will of people who had very little to work with and managed to make something that has lasted 30 years. That is the version of the story that Tucker has been telling, quietly, for a long time. And now that you know it, the film looks a little different.